Without warning, without hesitation, Lina's fist, the only black student in the class, shot forward, straight into Brandon's face, swift and precise as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. A sharp thwack echoed, and then his body slammed against the desk, knocking over paint boxes and rulers, everything scattering like a small accident in a confined space. A few screams erupted, chairs scraped, someone stood up. But Cole didn't just stand, he lunged forward, growling, "You crazy bitch, who do you think you are?" Lina leaned back, dodging the blow, her hand twisting Cole's wrist with cold efficiency. Her elbow slammed down onto the edge of the desk. A crack resounded. Cole crumpled, his face contorted, clutching his elbow in desperation. At the back of the room, Austin slowly stood up, his face pale, his hands raised. "Hey, stop it. That's enough." Lina turned back, her eyes filled with contempt. "Shut your mouth. What right do you have to say enough?" Lina Hart had just transferred to Eastwell High. She came from a part of the city these kids only whispered about, a place where standing up for yourself could get you jumped and staying quiet could make you a target. Lina knew how to survive. She had learned to keep her back straight, her eyes sharp, and her fists wrapped, just in case. But none of that mattered here. All they saw was a quiet black girl, new, alone, a blank slate for cruelty. So they came for her, first with whispers, then with bumps in the hallway, and finally with scissors. They wanted a reaction. What they got was silence. The teacher turned away. The room froze. Laughter followed. Someone muttered, "It was just a joke." But Lina didn't move. They thought she was soft. They thought she'd break. They were wrong. The sun was too bright for a Monday morning, washing the sky in a flat, pale blue that made the whole suburb feel fake, like it had been carefully arranged for a brochure. Lina sat in the back seat of her mother's battered Chevy, watching rows of identical houses slip past her window, each one with its perfect hedges and polished SUVs, like they were trying to out-suburb one another. Her mom hadn't said much on the drive, and Lina didn't expect her to. That had been their rhythm for months now, silence that filled every space like fog. As they pulled into the school's loop, Eastwell High towered ahead, clean, modern, sharp lines and banners that read, "Excellence through Unity." Lina stared at those words for a beat too long, her jaw tightening. Her mom glanced in the mirror, fixed her lip gloss, and muttered, "You'll be fine." No hug, no real look. Just a nod toward the school and the soft tap of her fingernails on the steering wheel, like she was already thinking about groceries. Lina stepped out of the car without a word. The door shut with a muted click behind her. She stood there for a moment, staring at the flood of students streaming inside. Backpacks slung, phones glowing, laughter bouncing off brick walls. Nobody looked at her directly, but she could feel it. The curiosity. The weight of being new and different. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, lifted her chin just slightly, and walked forward like she didn't care. But she did, and deep down she already knew. This place wasn't made for her. Not really, not yet. Lina stepped through the school gate in silence, as if entering foreign territory. Everything here was too orderly, too polished. The hallway was so clean that the floor reflected the fluorescent lights like a mirror. There was none of the familiar clamor, no rushed footsteps, no shouts echoing between iron classroom doors. Only an unnatural silence, reverberating from the glances that flicked toward her before quickly turning away, as if Lina's presence caused a subtle disturbance, just enough to make others uneasy. The first class she entered was history. The teacher, Mrs. Jenkins, offered a polite smile, but her eyes held an invisible distance. "We have a new student," she said, her voice overly sweet. "Lina Hart from West Hollow." The class's eyes turned to her, 1 second too, then looked away, as if she were a syntax error in their program. Lina sat at her assigned seat in the back, quiet. No one spoke, but she heard the rustle of paper sliding across desks. Whispers mixed with giggles, something about her hair. A voice, deliberately not soft enough. "Looks like she just got out of prison." Lina exhaled slowly, unmoved. Not because she didn't hear, but because she was waiting. She knew that if she reacted now, they'd think they'd won. The next classes dragged on heavily. When the lunch bell rang, she entered the cafeteria as if crossing a battlefield. Each table was its own territory. Groups of students laughing as if they'd known each other forever. She aimed for an empty table in the corner, but a blonde girl slid in first, shooting her a cold glance. Lina swallowed her frustration and moved to a table near the emergency exit, where no one sat. Every movement became calculated, opening her milk carton, unwrapping her sandwich, avoiding eye contact. But then her gaze caught three figures, Trent Morris and his shadows, Cole and Zach. They entered like the stage lights had just turned on. Laughter, shoulder slaps, eyes scanning the room. When Trent's gaze landed on Lina, he didn't look surprised. Not, "I've never seen her before," but, "I've seen her kind." He whispered something to Zach and all three laughed. Lina didn't lower her head, didn't blink. She stared back, blank, unyielding. That was the first time they noticed her. And that was when it all began. The next day, someone accidentally bumped her shoulder in the hallway. No apology, just a smirk. In the next period, the pen on her desk was knocked to the floor. Then the giggles, the whispers. Think she's cool 'cause she's black? Bet she aced chemistry by trading crack for a calculator. Lina stayed silent. Her hands rested firmly on her thighs, her eyes fixed on the board. She'd promised herself she wouldn't fight at this new school. But each day that promise grew thinner. A week passed like that, no punches thrown. But every word, every glance was a small cut. The smiles grew increasingly forced, not Lina's, but those of the teachers, the onlookers who pretended not to see. Until one day after chemistry, she opened her locker and found it stuffed with trash. Torn magazine pages, old tests, supermarket flyers. She thought it was a prank until she saw the words scrawled in black marker. "Go back where you came from. No one wants you here." Lina stood still. No tears, no words. She just bent down, stuffed the papers into her backpack, and shut the locker with a gentle but firm push. That afternoon, as she waited for the bus, a low voice spoke beside her. "You okay, kid?" Lina turned. It was Mr. Warren, the principal. Tall, solid, with skin as dark as her father's and calm eyes full of untold stories. He didn't speak like an adult lecturing. He spoke like someone who'd seen this too many times. "You sure you're not invisible?" he asked. Lina replied without thinking, "I never said I was." He smiled faintly. "No, but I've seen that look before. The look of someone who knows their limits, knows when someone's picked the wrong target." She tilted her head. "How do you know?" Mr. Warren said simply, "Because I wasn't always new either." Then he told her if something crossed the line and she wanted it formally addressed, to come to him. "I'll handle it in a way they won't expect." When the bus arrived, Lina climbed on and sat by the window. Outside, the sky was turning gray. She wasn't scared, she wasn't sad. She felt something growing in her chest. Not fire, but steel. They thought she'd just take it in silence. But they hadn't taken anything from her. Not really. Not yet. It happened on a Wednesday. The school was cloaked in a strange quiet, as if natural time had slowed, as if the very air was holding its breath. From the moment Lina stepped through the gates, she felt something was off. The gazes today didn't just flit past as usual. They lingered, watched, identified. In the hallway, she caught Trent leaning against the opposite locker, as if he were just coincidentally there. But his eyes had started earlier, tracking her every step. In math class, Zach kept turning back to look at her, whispering something to Cole that made them both snicker. But no one said anything aloud. Not a touch, not a prank, just the waiting. Something conspiratorial brewing in the silence. By art class, everything had slowed down as if time itself was setting a trap. Ms. Monroe, the teacher, had given the class creative freedom that day. The students scattered, using watercolors, construction paper, glue sticks. The scissors handed out were like toys, the blades dull enough that no one would think of danger. Lina sat at the back of the class, by the window, her pencil tapping a steady rhythm on the desk, sketching absent-mindedly. She wasn't drawing anything specific, just keeping her hands busy, keeping her mind still. She didn't hear the footsteps, didn't feel the movement. There was only a very faint snip, the sound of metal blades meeting strand, then a sudden sharp tug at the back of her neck. She froze, not pain, but cold. Her hand went up to the back of her head, instinctively. When she pulled it away, she saw thick strands of hair curled in her palm, a section of the braid she had meticulously woven the night before, severed, roughly, without warning. Behind her, Brandon, the one who had cut it, was laughing triumphantly, holding up the severed hair like a trophy. "Feeling lighter?" he said, twirling the braid like a puppet. "It was so heavy I helped you get rid of some weight." Laughter rippled from Cole, followed by a few shocked gasps. But no one intervened. Not a single person. Lina didn't turn her head, didn't scream. She just stared at the hair in her hand, the part of her that had been connected to her, the part she had chosen to represent herself. They hadn't just cut her hair. They wanted to cut through her silence. But not in the way they imagined. Austin, always the distant observer, spoke up today. "Did you really cut it off? Geez." She might actually cry. He wasn't laughing. He was testing the waters. Brandon leaned closer, whispering in her ear, "Just a joke. Don't make a big deal out of it. You're way too serious." Lina stood up, not hurried, not rushed. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor was like a warning. The whole class suddenly held its breath. She turned, her gaze fixed on the hair Brandon was holding. Brandon blinked. "Relax, it's just hair." Lina didn't blink. Didn't look away. Her voice came, clear, low, and even. "You think that makes it better?" Cole stepped closer, trying to force a smile. "No one meant to hurt your feelings. It was just a joke." Austin still sat far away, arms crossed, his voice laced with sarcasm. "You wear it like armor, so don't be surprised when people test if it's real." Lina turned her head towards him, still that same gaze, calm, unflustered. "You think this is about hair?" she asked. Her voice was so cold the silence in the room thickened. Brandon's eyes began to waver. He lowered his hand. The hair fell to the floor, curling like a discarded part of herself. Ms. Monroe finally looked up from her corner of the classroom, her expression stunned. "What's going on?" No one answered. Lina took one step, her eyes never leaving Brandon's. He took a half step back, raising his hands as if to placate her. "I said I was sorry. Don't make a big deal out of it." He didn't finish the sentence. The punch came without warning, without hesitation. A straight shot from her shoulder, clean and precise, landing squarely on his cheekbone. A heavy thud, flesh meeting bone, followed by the crash of his body against the desk behind him, sending paint pots and drawing paper flying in a chaotic spray. Shrill screams erupted. Cole lunged. Lina sidestepped his wild swing, twisting his wrist back with a swift, cold motion, and slammed her elbow down onto the edge of the desk. A sharp crack echoed. Cole crumpled, his face contorted in pain, clutching his arm in desperation. Austin stood up, his hands raised. Okay, you win." Lina's gaze was unwavering. "You don't get to speak." He didn't argue. Everything fell silent for a few seconds. No one dared to speak. No one laughed. A few students had pulled out their phones, not to help, to record. Ms. Monroe finally managed to call security over the intercom, but Lina had already moved to the center of the classroom, bending down to pick up the severed braid, holding it in both hands as if it were a piece of her very being. Then she walked out of the classroom, without a word, not running, just walking with a terrifyingly quiet determination, as if she knew exactly what was coming, as if she was ready for it. Lina didn't run. She walked slowly, each step echoing clearly in the sudden silence of the polished hallway. She didn't care. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, her hand clenching the severed hair like a piece of evidence, a reminder. "They touched me. They crossed the line. As she neared the main staircase, 2 security officers rushed towards her from the other end of the hallway. "Lina Hart, stop right there!" one of them yelled. She stopped. Not fleeing, not arguing. She stood tall, facing them as if presenting herself. As they approached, her steady gaze made them hesitate, as if they themselves weren't sure if they were apprehending a student or facing a force they couldn't contain. "You're being detained for assaulting other students in the classroom," one of them said, his hand hovering near his cuffs. "No need," she replied, her voice chillingly calm. "I won't resist." They led her down the hallway where students were silently gathering. No one laughed, no one spoke, only a heavy drawn-out silence. A few heads were bowed, others watched, eyes wide, not with fear, with awe. In the main office she was asked to wait. Her hands rested on her lap, still clutching the lock of hair as if it were the only part of the story that couldn't be twisted. A few minutes later, the principal's office door opened. Mr. Vaughn stood there, a tall, dark-skinned man with a quiet demeanor but eyes that held a sharp edge. He didn't ask if she had done it. He didn't need to. He just looked. "Come in," he said. No scolding, no accusation. Lina entered, sitting down across from him. The room was quiet, no ringing phones, no humming printers, only the soft creak of the leather chair as he leaned back, resting his elbows on the desk. "I've read Ms. Monroe's report," he began. 3 students injured, one with a severe nosebleed, one with a suspected dislocated elbow, and one too shaken to speak. Lina didn't respond. Her eyes remained steady. "Do you want to explain?" She raised the lock of hair, placing it on the desk between them. "They cut my hair." Silence. With classroom scissors. While I was sitting still, not bothering anyone. Mr. Vaughn didn't blink. He looked at the hair, then at Lina. His expression shifted, as if a part of the story he had suspected was now confirmed. "Do you know what you're facing?" "Yes, but I won't let anyone think I lost control. I know what I did and why I did it." He sat still, his hands clasped together. "They thought I'd run," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet weight. "They thought I'd cry, be scared, be silent, but not this time." After a moment, Mr. Vaughn exhaled, nodding slowly. "I can't ignore this. Rules are rules. You're suspended for 3 days." Lina nodded. "I understand. But I'm not letting them get away with it either." Lina looked up at him, a flicker of something softer in her eyes for the first time. "There are cameras in the classroom," he said. "No audio, but there's video. Enough to see clearly who did what. I'll be pulling the footage. And I'll be filing my own report." She nodded. "But Lina," he added, leaning forward, his voice slow and firm, "if you stay at this school, you need to understand something from now on. This isn't just your story anymore. It's the story of a lot of students who've never had anyone protect them." Lina's hands tightened on her lap. "I'm not going to stop." Mr. Vaughn gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, not one of relief, but the kind of smile of someone who has seen the storm coming from afar, and it has finally arrived. "Good," he said, "because you'll need more than fists. You'll need strategy. You'll need to remember. You'll need allies." She nodded. Slowly, clearly. He stood up, pulling an envelope from his desk drawer. "Here's your suspension paperwork. You can go. But I want you to do one thing." "What?" He pulled a small notebook from the drawer, placed it on the desk, sliding it towards her. "Write everything down. The date, the time, the words, the looks, the teacher's attitudes, what you see, what you hear. You don't fight back anymore. You record. We're going to turn this story into a file, into evidence. You don't retaliate. You let the truth do its work." Lina picked up the notebook, light. But she knew the real weight wasn't in the paper, it was in what was to come. "And when they ask," he said, his voice low, "we'll have everything." Lina didn't return to school with the posture of someone punished. She returned like someone awakened, like a survivor who knew the location of every crack in the seemingly solid wall of the system. The 3-day suspension hadn't weakened her, It had given her time to listen, not to what others said, but to what they tried to hide. As she walked through the school gates that day, the small notebook Mr. Vaughn had given her was tucked deep in her backpack. It lay there, thin, but carrying a new purpose. She began to observe, not just who looked at her, but who avoided her gaze, not just the sarcastic remarks, but who had heard them and chosen to remain silent, who rolled their eyes when Wyatt's group accidentally laughed loudly as she passed in the hallway, who quickly bowed their heads over their phones whenever a black student was questioned too long for being late. She wrote it all down, not for revenge, but to prove what had happened to her wasn't an isolated incident. It was a link in a chain of a mechanism too accustomed to the silence of children like her. Day 1, 9:13 a.m. Biology class. The teacher called on white students first. Lina and the other 2 black students were only asked when the bell rang. No one took notes. Day 2, 12:07 p.m. Cafeteria area. An Arab-American girl was called a ticking time bomb as she passed Wyatt's table. No one spoke up. She lowered her head and walked away. Day 4, 8:47, I.M. English teacher told a story about overcoming circumstances, as if it were the only way for black students to succeed. A white student joked quietly, "Lina probably has a short story about those hair-cutting incidents." Each entry was a stone laid in the foundation of a truth they couldn't deny. But Lina didn't just write, she listened. In the classroom, she saw a young teacher, Mr. Morales, stop mid-sentence when he heard a white student mock an Asian classmate for their high grades. His face tightened, but then he just told them to keep the atmosphere pleasant. Lina wrote down his name, not to report him but to observe further, who was weak with fear, who was indifferent with habit. Then one day, an unexpected thing happened. Lunch break, 1:11 p.m., a folded piece of paper slid under Lina's desk. She opened it, a carefully written, unsigned note. "Wyatt pushed me into the wall last year, too. I told the counselor. No one believed me. If you need a witness, I'm ready." Lina gripped the paper. In that moment she understood. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. She was just the first to stand up when everyone else was still bowing their heads. She didn't reply immediately. But that day the notebook gained a new page. Special note, 1:12 p.m. First ally. After school, Lina walked through the east hallway, a less crowded area. She stopped at the student bulletin board. There was a blank white sheet of paper with only a QR code. Curious, she scanned it. It led to an anonymous Google form titled, "Have you ever experienced discrimination? Share your story." No names, no logos, but there was a section to share details. Lina looked around, then quietly put her phone away. She knew someone else besides her was building a file, maybe a group of teachers, maybe another student. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the fire had spread. That afternoon when she walked into the principal's office to submit a few more notes, Mr. Vaughn said nothing. He just took the notebook, flipped through a few pages, and nodded. "We don't need to prove everything in one day," he said. "We just need to make it so they can't keep pretending." Lina smiled faintly. She was starting to believe it. Rumors spread faster than truth, but this time, the truth was the biggest rumor in the school. After Lina submitted her first set of notes to Mr. Vaughn, she didn't hear from him for almost a week. No feedback, no requests for updates. But the atmosphere in the school began to shift. A subtle tension, as if someone had slightly opened a door that everyone had long pretended not to see. On the 5th day, during second period, an unusual announcement came over the loudspeaker. All teachers are required to attend an emergency meeting at the end of the day. Students will be dismissed 15 minutes early. No reason was given, but Lina knew. That afternoon, as she walked past the principal's office, she saw an unprecedented sight. 3 teachers, 2 women, 1 man, huddled together, whispering intently. One pointed at a document in their hand, their face pale. She caught snippets of words, evidence, discrimination, and camera angles. She didn't stop, but inside a small sound echoed. It has begun. The next day, the morning was quieter than usual. On the bulletin board, a hastily posted sheet of paper read in bold letters, Meadow Ridge High School is committed to fostering a fair school environment and has zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior. Below that was the contact email for a school equity advisory group. Strangely, this group had never existed before. And then the students began to move. During lunch, a lower-classman named Marisol, often called Little Latina instead of her real name, came and sat next to Lina. Without a word, she placed a folded piece of paper on the table. When Lina opened it, she saw a short sentence. They used to take my wallet and put it in the trash can. I told my advisor, she said, no proof. Now I'll write it down. Lina nodded, folded the paper, and carefully tucked it into the middle of her notebook. Old voices began to reach her, not because she invited them, but because they saw in her something they hadn't seen in the teachers or adults. Patience with a purpose. 3 days later, the first flyer appeared on the school bulletin board. Do you see? Anonymous shares, we are listening. There was a QR code. There was an image of a hand reaching out from the shadows. An unnamed movement was forming, and Lina was at its center. Day 16, 10:02 a.m. A group of white students started laughing loudly when a Korean student answered a question wrong in biology class. This time the teacher didn't laugh along as usual. He tapped his ruler on the desk and said, laughing at someone for their ethnicity or appearance will not be tolerated in this class. The class fell silent. Lina wrote it down, but this time in blue ink. A sign of positive change. That evening, the anonymous group's inbox held over 20 testimonies. The next day, Mr. Vaughn called Lina into his office, his expression not relaxed. But when she placed the notebook on his desk, he simply said, I forwarded this to the district. She raised her head. All of it? Not just yours. The new testimonies, the repeated names, and the teachers who turned a blind eye. What was their response? They can't stay silent anymore, he said, then slid a piece of paper across the desk. An order for the complete video footage from all security cameras on school grounds, issued by the Independent Oversight Board. A punch not with a fist, but with data. And then came an unexpected moment. Day 21, a cold and slightly rainy early morning, Lina was invited by a teacher, Mrs. Shapiro, to speak during homeroom. She refused at first, but after the class began, she stood up. No long speech, no prepared words, just one sentence. If you've ever felt you had to be silent to be safe, that's exactly when you shouldn't be silent anymore. The class was silent, a different kind of silence, not avoidance, but listening. At the end of that week, as Lina was putting books in her locker, a light touch landed on her shoulder. It was Wyatt. No smirk, no taunt. His eyes held no challenge, just emptiness. I'm transferring after this semester, he said quietly. They started an investigation. Lina nodded. Not satisfaction, just acknowledgement. It's not for me, she said. It's for you. He didn't reply. He just walked away. And she turned back to her locker, opened the notebook, and wrote the final entry of the day. Not the end, the beginning.